Hello from me, Curtis Hutchinson and Philip Nothard, to this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast. And we're delighted to welcome back CAP HPI's Director of Valuations, Derren Martin, for his regular monthly review of used trade values. Welcome back to the podcast, Derren.
Thanks, Curtis.
Awards last week, awards this week, and events, and trying to get your deadlines done as well. So I know it's a busy time for you, Darren. So thanks for coming back on.
No, it's no problem at all. Happy to give an update on what we're seeing.
So for the listeners, we know that the CAP HPI editorial is just being published this morning, and listeners will recall that there was a slight dip of 0.5% last month in October. Can you start by bringing us up to date in terms of the headline, that 3-year 60 figure for the month of November as we head into the month of December, and how that compares with previous years?
Yeah, so it's a 1.2% drop at the 3-year point, which is equivalent to about £250 on average. And as you kind of alluded to, there's different ways of sort of looking at that. Because in previous years, it sort of compares fairly favourably, actually. It's a pretty strong November. We've had drops in the past of over 3% during November. I think when we were looking at this, probably forecasting a few months ago, we were expecting more of a dip in the last 2 months of the year, especially as the cost of living crisis was on everyone's lips around sort of August time. But so a 1.2% drop is pretty strong from that point of view. It is the third biggest drop this year. We had a couple of 2.1% in March and April, and then we've had a very stable period since then. So, but it has to be put into context. It's a minor drop really for the time of year. Values will always tend to drop away in the final quarter of the year as people focus on Christmas and don't particularly want to overstock. So, it's a strong month, I would say.
And I mean, that sort of brings the year to is it 9.4% down for the full year, which it's still been that sub 10% for a depreciation year at 3-year 60 is still strong, isn't it?
Yeah, it has strong year. As I say, it's been stable since sort of April, May time. Very small drops. People have to remember that last year was completely unprecedented, and values do tend to drop as cars age in their life cycle, with supply and demand dynamics coming into play as well. Values do tend to drop. So it has been a strong year, very stable, I would say, off the back of what happened last year. Reassuringly, no big crash, as we said there wouldn't be. It wasn't what goes must come down. There's just been sort of gentle movement down on certain models.
And Derren, looking at specifically at some of the sectors, can you take us through how some of the sectors performed? I mean, I was interested to see that city cars dipped, having increased over the last couple of months, but MPVs and upper medium cars were amongst the strongest sectors. So, any thoughts as to what's driving that trend?
Yeah, well, the city car drop, it's not huge. It has been strong. Still, city cars are still worth plenty more than they were worth a year or even longer than that ago. And you have to look beyond the averages more this month than ever. And we have put some models up this month, even city cars which are down on average. So Citroen C1s, Seat Me, Vauxhall Adam, they've all increased actually this month. So the devil really is in the detail, as we always say. MPVs down 0.4%, so a smaller drop there certainly, and upper medium down 0.8%. And I just think that they're kind of affordable cars compared to SUVs. They don't look overpriced. They went up quite a lot last year, and maybe just a little bit, excuse me, more of a sort of a desire to stock vehicles like that. That drop on MPV is like a £50 drop. So they do remain quite strong, and obviously there's they're not being made in great numbers by in the new car market anymore. So desirable purchase still really an MPV, and as I say, upper medium cars, which used to be a large proportion of the market, are now a lot smaller. So just look at a little bit more desirable price wise versus SUVs.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting trend, isn't it? Because MPVs and upper mediums are kind of almost like old-fashioned segments now, and SUVs had taken over from them.
Yeah, definitely, but there's still all good cars, and
Yeah.
obviously an MPV is very versatile. If you need the space, maybe a 7-seater SUV is a lot more expensive than an MPV. So yeah, good cars and drive well, and yeah, have been strong for a lot of this year. And yeah, upper medium, again, there's some 3 Series, a desirable vehicle that's in that
Yeah.
sector. So A4, all of those types of vehicles, which are, as I say, good value compared to an SUV now.
And any thoughts on the Fiesta? Because I think since last time we spoke to you last month, Ford actually announced that the Fiesta was finishing production. So any ramifications there for the used car sector? Are you seeing anything?
I don't think so. Excuse me. The Fiesta has dropped in value by around 3% this month, but I don't think that's anything to do with the announcement. We've seen more volume come back into the market. There was a lot of new car activity on it. It was back to #1 registered car last month, looking likely to be the same this month, which is sort of back to previous how it used to be previous times. Maybe the Puma is sort of fairly close to the Fiesta in price and is looking better value for money. But overall, I just think it's a bit of a softening on Fiesta values, and nothing untoward and nothing to do with that announcement really. Still a desirable car, and when you look at how much it's worth compared to pre-COVID times, I mean it's still worth around sort of 30% more than it was in 2019. So we're sort of tracking back that 3-year age to 3 years ago. It's worth sort of over 2.5 grand more than it was then. So I don't think there's anything to worry about.
I think that's a point that people have still got to keep remembering, haven't they? That you start talking about drops, but actually, as you say, when we say every time we catch up lately, that we've got to remember where these values have been and where they're coming from. Into it, that's the key with this. That you soon start to forget when you start to see some drops of actually where they are in comparison to pre-COVID levels of values.
Oh, very much so. I mean, there's cars that are 70. I think the V Class is almost 80% more, which is sort of 22, 23 grand more than it was at the same age and mileage 3-year point 3 years ago. So, I mean, there's some crazy things in there. Citroen Space Tourer, 72% more, nearly 10 grand more than the 3-year-old one was worth 3 years ago. And there's plenty of other examples. We've got loads of cars that are more than 50% more than they were 3 years ago. So yeah, even when you're getting these drops now, it's not going to go anywhere near biting into those increases.
And the headline story this month seems to be around the fuel type, for many reasons, but with some more falls really on the EV sector, the electric vehicle sector. But what would you say, any notable sort of movements, brands, models, etc., that you've seen activity around that in November?
Well, undoubtedly, the story is EVs this month. Everybody's wanted to talk to us about EVs, from dealers to the auctions, asking sort of what we're seeing within the data there, what we're doing to movements in our live product, and examples of sort of car buying services that were looking at our live values during the month and dropping their offers for EVs off the back of that, which is why we always sort of say live is the way to go. EVs have dropped by 3.7% at that 3-year point, which is about £1,200 at 3 years old. So that's quite a movement. And what we're seeing and hearing is that the consumers are not looking to buy EVs. The moment they've switched off from them. It's expensive to refuel them, to charge them up, especially if you're not doing it at home. And those cars are expensive as well in the market. They're 10, 12 grand more than a petrol or diesel equivalent. So, and they're expensive on their own anyway. There aren't many cheap EVs around there at the moment. There's obviously some reasonably priced MGs and that type of thing, and some of the new Chinese brands coming in. But generally, EVs are expensive. So we've seen a drop off in the trade performance, and we've seen a drop off in the consumer performance. And I think it kind of makes sense. You don't particularly want to stock up on a load of EVs at the moment when there's such uncertainty in the market. So Tesla has taken quite a hit. Values dropped by 7% on Model 3, 5% on the Model S, 4% on the Model X, and 5% on the Model Y. And in monetary terms, that's sort of that can be sort of up to £4,000 for the Model S. it's not just this month we've seen pressure on Tesla, but there's more pressure this month has been, and there's pressure on other brands in the EV world as well. So we've seen some Audi e-tron down nearly £3,000, BMW i3 down £2,500, Polestar 2 down nearly £2,500, and even the Nissan Leaf has come down £1,000. So we are definitely seeing some sort of realignment going on in the EV market. You have to sort of caveat those movements by saying they won't necessarily continue. Once cars reach a certain price point, they become attractive again. But at the moment, there is a lot of pressure on those vehicles, and consumer demand has dropped away. So it's and volumes are increasing in the market as well. So it's just a little bit of a very interesting dynamic. That's what's happening there. When the average drop is 1.2%, and EVs are dropping by 3 times that. That is a very interesting dynamic.
And how's petrol and diesel at the minute? Because those vehicles are probably getting fewer and fewer in terms of volume. For obviously market share of diesel over the years, but actually the drop in activity of production, etc. But how's that performing? Because there's obviously still strong demand out there for petrol diesel, then in comparison.
Yeah, they're holding up okay actually. They, as I said at the start, it's been a strong month overall. It really is EVs that stand out as being the weakness. Diesels have dropped by the least amount on average, less than 1%. Petrols have dropped by 1.3%, so in line with the average really. And there's still demand out there. Diesel vehicles, yeah, if you live near a clean air zone, maybe not for you, but in other areas, certainly got a place. Diesel is an expensive fuel compared to petrol, but if you do the miles, diesel still works, and those values have held up well. And certainly for certain vehicles, you probably want a diesel there, sort of for the fuel consumption side of things. So yeah, they've done all right. We are seeing less of them in the data, but still plenty of them. And it's going to be a long time before EVs overtake them in the used car market with regards to volumes. So still plenty of cars out there. We're seeing around 20% less data overall than we were seeing pre-COVID, just of what's happened in the used car market, sorry, in the new car market. But overall, diesel and petrol continue to perform well. No concerns there at all.
And every month, Derren, you ask dealers about what they're seeing in terms of stock levels. So what have they reported back this month in terms of their stock levels?
I think the stock levels are okay. They're keeping them steady. No one's overstocking. I haven't spoken to any dealer that is overstocking or is stocking up for January at the moment. I think there's concerns about consumer demand going into the new year. It's very much an unknown. So they're just being steady. They're kind of picking off, replacing cars. They're not overstocking for cars. So yeah, I think in general there's a little bit of an eye on what may happen next year. And if the market starts off strong, then I guess they'll all be back in the market in January looking to stock up.
Yeah, and interesting what you say about consumer demand. So they're not seeing huge demand, are they?
No, demand has dropped off from consumers, but it always does at this time of year.
Yeah.
Dealers we've spoken to are fairly upbeat. They're having to work hard. They're adjusting prices on cars that maybe have been in stock for a little bit too long. But overall, they're trying to help maintain prices because it is more of a seasonal drop than anything to do with sort of economic concerns. And used cars tend to do well in times of recession. So people will maybe come out of a new car or will not buy a new car. They'll buy a used car instead, or they may come out of an expensive vehicle and look to a smaller one, especially maybe for their second car or something like that. So I think the used cars it's a seasonal downturn. It's nothing more than that.
And you always talk about margins. How are the margins holding up? What's the feedback on margins? Because we've had significantly healthy margins throughout last year and the majority of this year. Are the dealers still managing to hold on to margin, or are we starting to see some weakness sort of set in there as activity and demand starts to ease off slightly?
Yeah, I think margins are under pressure. They are, but they're coming from a very high point. So we have to remember that they're not going to be as buoyant as they were last year. With as retail adjusts, as retail demand adjusts, then there will be some moves made on retail pricing, and trade prices that have remained strong. So it depends on the model, but there's a little bit of a squeeze on margins. But as I say, I don't think the dealers are overly concerned, and it's probably back to more normal behaviour for the time of year than we've had for a couple of years. So I think margins are under pressure, but overall are holding up okay, and dealers are focusing on the F&I, as they always do, on getting a good part exchange in, all of those type of things.
And finally, Derren, what are your predictions for December? You've already touched on stocking for January, because traditionally in normal times this would be a time for dealers to be stocking up for January, but we're not seeing that. So I just wonder what your predictions are for December going into January and indeed Q1.
England win the World Cup and everyone goes out and buys a car to celebrate. No, I
Yeah,
think
well, stranger
uh,
things have happened.
that
They'd be upsetting the Welsh listeners for tomorrow night's game on that one, Darren. Careful.
yeah, well, I don't think England are winning the World Cup either, but you never know. So I think forecast for December, I think it's more of the same, really. I think that there's not going to be demand isn't going to increase in December. It never does. And I don't think dealers are going to be out buying in abundance for January. So I think it will be more of the same. We're certainly not predicting a huge drop off in values, though. They will continue to decline, I would say. EVs are one to watch again, just because of what's happened. What's happened over the last month and the last few months. So I think it's just, I would say, an air of caution. Values will probably drop by a similar amount to this month, but overall nothing too much to worry about. And then as we move into January, I think all bets are off, really. I personally think it will be quite a stable month in January, because there's just simply not going to be a load of cars in the market. Even if demand isn't buoyant, there's not a load of cars coming
Yeah.
back. We're at new levels of supply. That is the main concern from speaking to sort of the auctions and that type of thing, that there's just probably not enough stock out there, really. So that will keep values relatively strong.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think that's the key into it. I think at the minute there isn't stock coming back in any sort of abundance, and if consumer demand does start to recover or return, depending on Christmas and New Year, etc., that actually, you could have a shortage of stock, couldn't you, again, which could create another dynamic. And as you say, EVs, there's no sort of end in sight of the energy crisis at the minute. So I suppose EV is going to be under a little bit of pressure as they continue to realign themselves. But yeah,
Yeah, and
very
volumes are
difficult.
going to continue to increase, but EV volumes will increase. So there just has to be a way out of that, really, for manufacturers and for anyone selling them. So they need to find a home. So there's potentially a little bit more pressure on those. But as I said earlier, if prices drop, once prices reach a level, then they become desirable again. So
Yeah.
and yeah, I think more so than ever, Christmas is a bit of a reset this time around for no one quite sure what's going to happen next year. It's very much a moving feast for the economy. We know we're in for tough times, but as I said earlier, used cars do tend to do well. And if there is a little bit of demand out there in January, then dealers will be out there buying again. But I do think it's just a bit of almost like a bit of a watershed, really, with Christmas and what happens next year. It's sort of a start again sort of situation.
Yeah, no. I mean, as always, Darren, it's fantastic to have you coming back on, and appreciate you coming back onto the podcast. And just a reminder to listeners that the latest editorial is now available, and you can find it on the CAP HPI website. That's cap-hpi.com. Or you can find it on some of through the social channels, particularly on LinkedIn. If you either follow Solera, CAP HPI, or Derren on LinkedIn, you'll be able to find the editorial there. And Derren, hopefully we look forward to you joining us again in December to share as sort of where we're going to sort of finish the year and look at how December's sort of performing, and maybe a bit better, clearer view of what might be happening in the new year, but maybe not. But appreciate you coming back on as always, Derren.
Yeah, sure. Yep. I'll speak to you next month.
Many thanks, Darren. That's all from us. You've been listening to a special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast. We're back with the week's car retailing headlines on Saturday. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.